Hello everybody and welcome to Table Talk. We're now in week 2 of our new series, which is called Faith. So as I mentioned on the last episode, we decided to do something a little bit different this time. When it comes to faith, it's very much a case of really digging into how do we get to a place where we can really build our faith, and that often leads to testimonies. So in this second week, we have our youth intern here with us, Kathryn. Welcome.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So thank you so much for coming along. I really appreciate it. Having sort of checked in on your story and your journey to getting to this point, which is kind of, I guess, the subject of today's conversation. One of the first things I guess I really wanted to dig into was, what was your sort of first day like here in the UK? New homes, new surroundings. What's that like?
Very daunting. I think it's kind of like walking into, you know, like a new job or a new school, but you are in a very different place. You have such different expectations, which I think we all do when we go into new situations, is we expect something, and then when we actually get there, we're like, oh, this situation is not anything like I expected. And that's exactly how I felt, like walking off the plane and being like, oh wow, like I don't know what's coming.
Yeah, I hear that. Like, what was the vision that you had in your mind before you stepped off the plane?
Well, first of all, rainy. We arrived in the middle of the drought, like 3 years ago, where it was like super brown, super like, you know, everything was really dead. Yeah. But I kind of expected a lot different things with the culture as well. Like I didn't expect the kind of way people went about certain things and just the difference in how things are done here. And I don't think people understand how like different everything is here and how easy things are for them, that they're just like, oh yeah, I can just do this. And they don't even have to think about it.
That's interesting. So on top of that then, lead me then into sort of the whole feeling of loneliness, because not only is there a different way that people tend to do things, so the way that you probably interact would be different and you sort of having to get used to that. But you spoke about sort of loneliness in your testimony, and how did that sort of manifest itself? And then after that, how did God first answer that prayer of getting rid of that loneliness?
I went through a big season of loneliness because when I first got here, of course, all my friends were still in South Africa. And for a lot of time, I was just sitting and praying every single night. I had like a list of prayers that I would pray for a church, some friends, and certain things like that, where I was just like so desperate to have someone that knew me. Because every day I'd walk out, like we'd go do our little thing, you know, go sightsee, go, you know, find our way around. And then I'd sit at home and talk to my friends from South Africa. And I'd be like, I just want to be able to have someone who's here, who knows me, that I don't feel like I'm walking outside and every single person I'm seeing is a stranger. And so it really like overtook me a lot of the time, because I was just sitting going, no one knows me. And like I just wanted to have that connection and just have that kind of root, so that it didn't feel as much like, oh, I'm just here on holiday. It felt like, you know, this is actually where I'm going to be living.
And would you say that you're naturally an introvert or an extrovert?
I'm more of an introvert. I have grown to be more of an extrovert, but I think that happens when you move countries, because as well, like it is just such a fresh start, and I had to, because especially coming into the British schooling system, I had to go to people and be like, I don't understand this, could you explain this? Or I don't know where to go, could you help me? Where I would not normally have done that. I would have just figured it out, but because everything is so new, I was just like, I have to I have to own up to that and just do that.
And what was that like then, sort of coming into the British schooling system? Like, not only have you changed schools, country, the whole nine, it's a whole new environment for you. So what was that like, trying to sort of navigate school culture? Because even that, there's its own set of rules.
It's so interesting, because I came in and I did my A levels, and then I did like other classes so that I could bridge the gap for GCSE English and maths. And it's so different because everybody's just come out of their GCSEs, which I have not experienced, and they were all like going on about how great their freedom was, and I was like, this is so free. Like, being in South Africa, like school uniform up until you finish school, whereas like A levels you can, you know, smart business attire for the end. But just the culture behind it is so different, because specifically A levels, people had a bigger drive to just study, because it was like, oh, these are the subjects I want to do, you know, instead of, oh, here's like 10 subjects that have been dumped on my plate and I'm gonna have to get through them. Whereas they're like specialized, so people seemed a lot more willing to learn, which was interesting.
Okay. And what would you say, like, in terms of that whole experience coming into a new school, what did that teach you about yourself during that time?
It taught me a lot about how I handle going into new situations, because I really thought going in on that first day, I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this. Like, I'm just gonna have to keep my head down, just hope that nobody notices me. But I actually managed to make a couple friends like right away, and it taught me a lot about how much I'd been hoping and praying for that like level of loneliness to be taken away. It taught me about like a lot about how God was just able to be like, okay, settle your nerves. Like, I'm gonna give you like a friend immediately who I'm still friends with today. And he really like started to even just provide in those moments, like even before, you know, the big like prayers, to quote, had like been answered, which was really cool.
So how did that impact your relationship with God, and how did he communicate that in terms of him answering those prayers? Was it based on the situations that you experienced in terms of, you know, meeting your first friend, or was there like some like a dialogue?
I think for a long time it was just kind of this desperate thing, and towards like where I started schooling, I did get to a point where I was like, God, please just help me to get through this. Like, I just want to know someone. And I got to a point where I was like starting to feel like very anxious and being like, God, you're not providing. Like, I really need you to provide. And he was just kind of like, wait, like, just wait a little bit longer. Like, don't worry, I have heard, and I'm not going to leave you all alone. I'm still, you know, here in the midst of those feelings. Like, even though he didn't answer it like right away, and I didn't just meet someone immediately when I got off the plane, he really helped to really let me understand that, you know, he was still there in the midst of like that troubling time in my soul.
Gotcha. So what do you think, why do you think he put you through a season of loneliness? What was the lesson in that solitary period?
I think a massive lesson was because before I left South Africa, I remember like the day before we left, I was at a conference and I sat down on the floor and I was praying about just, God, this is yours. Like, I'm trusting you for this season. And I think the season of loneliness, God wanted me to trust him. I think it was all about that, okay, you have no one else, like you can only really talk to your friends at certain times because they're at school or they're doing certain things in South Africa. And he kind of just really, I think, wanted me to just have that level of trust with him, that I was just sitting at home being like, well, I don't know anyone, but God, I know you.
That's deep. That's deep. No, I like that because it's almost like in the midst of all the noise, there was at least somewhere that you could be grounded, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So then as a result, how has that impacted your faith and built your resilience then, would you say?
I trust God a lot quicker now. Like, I'm a lot quicker to be like, okay, it's in God's hands, it's okay. Because I went through that season where I felt like I only had him to trust and lean on. That coming out of that situation, it was like, well, God's always here. Like, he was here when I was in South Africa. He's always going to be here. And so now when things happen, I try and make it a conscious, like, first response of, I'm going to go to God because he's never left me and he never will leave me. Whereas, like, humans can leave. That feeling of loneliness can always come back. But knowing that God's there will always, like, be consistent.
That's very true. Okay. So talk me then through when he started to answer the big blessings in terms of finding church home, all of that.
So coming into MKCC, I remember, like, physically my first day at Fuse, like, walking in and being immediately introduced to people. And I remember sitting there like, can this be, like, what is going to be my, like, church home? Is this going to be? And immediately the group of friends that I'd been put in, they were absolutely amazing, so accommodating. They didn't make me feel awkward or that, like, I was this massive outsider. It was just kind of, okay, we're playing this game, come sit with us. You know, we're going to carry on playing. If you want to join in, you can join in. If not, that's cool. But, like, we're not going to make you feel completely lonely and, like, out of the circle, which was, like, super cool, because that was the first time I was like, okay, I feel like this could be the start of God answering my prayers, because I didn't feel that, like, I'm the outsider in the circle.
Right.
Anymore.
And in that then, you know how, like, sometimes when you are somewhere in your purpose journey and you sometimes will get this sense of peace when you go somewhere new that, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be. Did you have a similar experience like that when you got to MKCC?
In a way, yes, but in another way, no, because I did still feel, like, very anxious about, like, because I was very comfortable in my church in South Africa, and so I was like, I don't know if anything will, you know, replace that. I had a lot of reservations, which I think was where God was, like, trying to knock down those walls and being like, you have to open yourself up to a different church, a different group of friends, because otherwise you're not going to receive, like, the answers to your prayers. And so coming in, I was, like, really reserved. But as I started to be like, actually, you know, lower those walls, being like, could this be somewhere? Then I did have that, like, sense of peace that I was like, I feel really comfortable here. Like, I feel like I'm heard. I feel like, you know, people know me and want to know me.
I like that. So if you had to meet your younger self coming off the plane, what would you say to your younger you, like, to do differently?
I think immediately start trusting God. Because the prayers started almost immediately when I got here. But I think it took a little bit of time for that, like, trust to kick in, and for the time that I was spending with God to not be as desperate in just being like, okay, God, I'm sitting here praying for this, but actually being like, okay, God, I've prayed for this, you know this, I'm still going to pray for it, but I just want to spend time with you. And coming in with that trust of, you're not going to leave me. And so I would just say immediately to my younger self, like, go in and just wholeheartedly put your trust in God, because he does come through. Like, he's not going to leave you at any point in the journey.
Absolutely. So when it comes to, I just want to go back to that solitary period again, because it sounds very much like you and God have got this very strong dialogue. So first and foremost, how do you pray? Is it like writing a letter or like having a conversation?
It's more of a conversation. I like to pray out loud because I like to feel like I'm not just, you know, in my head, because I'm able to get distracted more easily. And so even just like whispering, I feel like it's easier to concentrate on what I'm saying. And yeah, I think God also has taught me a lot about being silent in when I'm praying to him as well, you know, to listen instead of just speak. Because there was a lot of time in that period where I was just, oh God, I need this. Oh God, please help me with this. Oh, give me this. And I think there was a point where I got to that he was just like, okay, be silent for a little bit, because I can't speak if you're like, I'm not going to speak over you.
That's interesting. That's interesting, sort of having that relationship. Does it feel like a father-daughter relationship, or more like two friends and one happens to be the creator, if you see what I mean?
Both. Like, in a lot of ways, obviously God is our father, but it is also just that, you know, friendship kind of bond that I feel like he's, you know, gonna respect. Okay, you're speaking right now, I've heard you, but now I'm gonna, like, you know, when you're silent, when I get a moment, I'm gonna come in and speak. So it definitely feels like a mixture of both, where, you know, you have that like figure of God being like a father and he's comforting me in that sense, but then also listening like a friend.
So when it comes to things like patience, how has he, because I know you kind of touched on this already, how has he been able to build your patience, like on a day-to-day? How's that changed?
Tremendously. Yeah, I think because I was in, because it was a couple months of that like loneliness period of before I really came and met anyone, and so God really taught me a lot about staying patient in that time, because I think I'm very quick to want things to happen really quickly, and I think with the way that society is right now, everything is instant gratification, with regards to, like, you know, you can pick up your phone and find an answer to something really quickly, but I think God really was like, okay, here's this period of time, I'm not going to change my like timeline to fit what your needs are. I'm going to like show you what my timeline is and how that's going to be better for you.
That's a really interesting point. I think that's one of those things which, funny enough, Sarah and I were talking about that as well earlier on. The whole idea of we have this set plan in our minds of when we would like certain things to happen.
Yeah.
And then having to sort of throw that away and kind of let God take the wheel. So when it comes to your expectations for things now, how much do you tend to have sort of an expectation that something can come through, or are you kind of like, God willing, if this happens, it happens, if not?
I think like a lot of the time I am still wanting, you know, things to happen, but I have also learned a lot to slow down and kind of take that time and be like, okay, I know I want this to happen, but God, if this is what you want to happen, then like have it happen. And so still having those feelings of like, you know, humanly feelings of like wanting things to happen immediately or wanting to go through with it. But I think I've got a greater understanding now of being more patient and being like, okay, I think this is what's going to happen. This is what I would like to happen, but I'm still going to ask God and wait for his answer before like fully going through with it, instead of, you know, jumping the gun and then him being like, come on, like, I'm going to lead you this way.
That's interesting. So looking at this whole journey where he's kind of giving you, I guess you could say, like a slow burn blessing.
Yeah.
What's that been like to experience, where you're just seeing all these little extra things that have kind of been added as part of this answered prayer over time?
It's crazy because, you know, like you've heard people with slow burn prayers, and you've heard people who like they've prayed over such a long season and then it be answered. And for me, I was like not entirely certain that that could be something to happen for me, because I'd heard it, but I was like, okay, but there's nothing really ever in my life that I'd prayed that much about, because nothing else was as important to me as like when we first landed. And so I'm still like seeing God come through in ways with that prayer and like those first prayers today, and it's been 3 years later, which is really cool. But seeing those like blessings come through, it really helps to solidify the fact that like God really is so good. He's not leaving us in, you know, the wake of our pain, but he's actually like really helping us to come through it, because when we trust him through it, then we're coming out on the other side being stronger in him as well.
So given that, then what was it about God's character during the course of this 3 years that surprised you?
Oh, what surprised me? I I mean, I think God always surprises us with like different things that he does, because yeah, he's so amazingly good. But what really surprised me was just the kind of patience I think he had with me as well. Like, we spoke about my patience in that, but I think he was also really patient with me. To just be like, okay, she's going on, she's rambling a little bit. But I think he really like helped me to, you know, when I was in that season of like being really anxious and being really, you know, like wanting things to move forward, he was really patient in, you know, letting me go through those feelings, but then also like helping to guide me through them, and not just being like, okay, it's fine, like, please stop. Like, he's still, you know, he was really patient with everything I was feeling.
That's good. So one thing which I spoke to Pastor John Keel about when we had our table talk was around this idea of omens. Have you ever heard of the book The Alchemist before, by Paulo Coelho? Have you read it?
No.
Okay, highly recommend it. One of the things which he talks about in this book, because it is a very sort of God-centered book in terms of the principles that are built around the narrative. Yeah. He speaks a lot about this idea of omens. So almost these physical signs, I guess you could say, that he's kind of assisting you in your journey. So would you say then, given the relationship that you have with him, does he also tend to show you signs which may be very specific and unique to you in terms of how you can tell, oh, it's him? Does he communicate with you in that way so that you kind of know, okay, something is coming, or this was definitely from him because it's his way?
Yeah, I think, so there's no like special way that it's always like, oh, that's God. But something that he's always done is speak through people to me. And with the way that people have spoken to me, there are certain things that people say that I'm like, oh, you had no idea, like, I needed to hear that. And so it's kind of in those moments that I think that I'm like, okay, that's God speaking, like, because someone will come over and say something that they have no idea that I'm going through that situation, but what they've said really like sticks because I really needed to hear that. And so God's like helping them to kind of speak to me.
So how has that changed the way that you listen in a conversation? Are you listening for, I don't know, like a nugget of gold that God might speak through somebody? So
I'm just sitting there like, no, I think it, specifically going through seasons, it does change, specifically when you're talking to someone about a situation or saying like, oh, I'm going through this thing at the moment. You do kind of listen more. Like, I've learned to take in what people have said more, rather than being like, okay, this is everything I want to say and like, let's move on. You know, like, I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm very open to hearing what people think about situations and want to, you know, possibly guide in that, because I know that God likes to chuck in a little nugget every now and then.
That's very true. That's very true. So what would you say that this faith journey over this last 3 years has been sort of brought to you, to teach you, so to speak? And how would you say that you tend to react to new beginnings now as a result?
I think this faith journey has, you know, been brought to teach me so much. I feel like the person I was 3 years ago is not at all the person I am today, because I think God has done such incredible things. And my outlook on new beginnings is really I can do anything because I've got God. Like nothing really scares me the same way that it used to. Because getting on that plane and coming here, that was the first time I'd ever been on an airplane. That's the first time I'd ever like been to a different country. Whereas like now, I'm like, well, God help me through that. I can get through this. This is fine. Like, I'll just have to suck it up and do it, because I know that God's not going to just be like, okay, goodbye, I'll see you later. Like, he's helping to guide me through that.
Would you say that's kind of been a characteristic of his that you've seen, where he will put you through the harder thing first, so that when it does come to sort of the next big thing, which he needs you to be focused on, you're not overwhelmed because it's like, oh, I've handled this in the past. So
yeah, God really, like, specifically with my journey, I felt like that is a big thing that
technology is a very, very strange thing, people. I have no idea what's been going on with my phone, but I digress. Carry on. Yeah.
Specifically with my journey, I like very much relate with, I think it's Do It Again by Elevation Worship, where like saying like, you've never left me and I've seen you do it before and you'll do it again. And just that whole theme has been such a big part of like who I am now, because I know that no matter what God is doing in my life and in my heart, he's not going to just leave me. Like, I think that's something really big that I've learned about him through this whole season.
I think that's amazing, because it's almost like a superpower in of itself. It's like, I know that he's with me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So having said that then, how is your faith now?
My faith now is like, I think everybody goes through up and down seasons. But I think there's always that like, kind of like, you know, an old friend that you share like a deep secret with, or you, like you share something with that nobody else understands. It's like, even when I go through those patches where like, you know, I'm busier and I don't get as much time with God, or you know, like those kind of seasons, I still know like, oh, you know, like God's there, like that little kind of piece of it is still in there, where it's like, I still know that he's in that season and working and doing that, so that when, you know, when I am able to come back, I know that he's still like, he's been there through the entire journey, and he's like, hey, I saw that, like I was here.
That's beautiful. I really just thank you so much for taking the time to sort of share your journey and be so vulnerable. So really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, guys, also for tuning in. As usual, we've got 3 services for you this weekend, so please make sure to book online if you plan to join us in person. It's always better to come in person anyway if you can. It's much better. So, so it'd be good to have you join us this coming Sunday, and thank you for joining us on Table Talk. We'll see you next week. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.